I am suspecting a possible affair between my girlfriend and our roommate. We all live together. Am I being paranoid? We are two couples sharing an apartment, all of us attending the same university. Initially, my girlfriend of approximately 2 years, Alexis, 22F, and our mutual friend Brooke, 22F, had leased this spacious and rather pricey apartment. The original plan was for 3 girls to share the space, but one dropped out unexpectedly. They had contemplated moving to a more affordable place, but their love for the apartment, into which they had put considerable effort, held them back. When my lease was due to end in May, I proposed moving in to help share the rent and utility costs, a suggestion they were thrilled about given I was frequently spending the night anyway. Just before my move, Brooke began dating my best friend Derek, creating a delightful dynamic where we could all spend time with our significant others and best friends simultaneously. This seemed like an ideal arrangement. Derek started staying over frequently, and when his parents sold their house in October, he moved in temporarily. We haven't pressured him to find a new place, as dividing the costs 4 ways has been financially beneficial for all of us. However, only Alexis and Brooke are officially on the lease. The landlord, surprisingly, has no objections as long as the rent is paid on time and we maintain our quiet lifestyle. There have been 3 incidents that raised suspicions for me. If it weren't for these combined events, I would never suspect anything untoward, as Alexis is a gentle and reserved girl and Derek has always been like a brother to me. They don't appear flirtatious, but given that all 4 of us are close friends and spend a substantial amount of time together, it's difficult to discern. Incident 1. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, Brooke and I have early morning classes, so we typically leave the house by 8 a.m. Derek and Alexis, on the other hand, have afternoon classes, so it's common for them to depart together, although they usually drive separately. One day, I decided to surprise Alexis by waiting for her outside her class to invite her for lunch. As students started pouring out of the classroom, I noticed Alexis was not among them. I texted her to find out where she was, and she responded that she had just left class and was heading home to study. I found it strange when she didn't pick up my call, especially considering she had just texted me. It was even more unusual when she didn't return my call until much later, because Alexis is typically glued to her phone. Later in the day, Brooke mentioned casually that Derek had stayed home due to illness and she was planning to take him some soup. I didn't give it much thought at the time. When I got home later that evening, I noticed Alexis' car parked in the same spot as usual. She normally parks in the guest parking area since our unit only has 3 spaces, so her car tends to move around quite a bit. When I asked her if she attended class, she hesitated before confessing that she had skipped class because she felt the professor was ineffective at explaining the subject matter. Knowing that I disapprove of skipping classes, as it has previously affected her grades negatively, she assured me that she probably wouldn't do it again because being alone at home was boring. I accepted her explanation and we carried on with our day. However, as I was drifting off to sleep that night, a realization hit me. If Derek was homesick as Brooke had mentioned, then Alexis shouldn't have been alone at home. Fully awake now, I asked Alexis about Derek's whereabouts during the day. She seemed taken aback by my question, but she explained that he was home for a while in the morning but left to run errands. Her scattered response seemed odd, given the recent incidents, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. Incident 2. While disposing of some trash in the kitchen, I noticed a condom wrapper identical to the brand Alexis and I use. It was partially hidden behind a cereal box, but its distinctive color drew my attention. Brooke and Derek usually use a different brand, which they get for free from the University Health Center, while Alexis and I prefer the pricier Trojan brand. The unusual location of the wrapper struck me as odd, since we typically dispose of such items in our individual rooms' waste bins and not in the kitchen. Adding to the peculiarity, Alexis and I hadn't been intimate for several days due to exam stress. Not wanting to rummage through the trash for further evidence, I returned to our room to check if any of our condoms were missing. However, it was hard to tell since we buy in large quantities. My initial assumption was that Brooke and Derek might have run out of their supply and helped themselves to ours without asking, which irked me. Later that night, I brought up the condom wrapper incident with Alexis, who reacted with surprising alarm. Her normally calm demeanor was replaced with agitation as she vented about our privacy being violated. When I proposed confronting Brooke and Derek about it, she vehemently objected and made me promise not to mention it unless it happened again. Her reluctance to address the issue struck me as strange given our usually open discussions about sex as roommates. However, considering Alexis hails from a conservative small town and isn't as forthcoming about such matters as the rest of us, her reaction could have been genuine. Incident 3. Derek and I maintain a friendly rapport with the guys residing in the adjacent apartment, who are also alumni of our university. While we don't socialize extensively, we share casual conversations about sports or other topics in the hallway and comfortably request each other to minimize noise without any discomfort. Last Monday, during our break, I happened to bump into one of them while I was securing the apartment in the absence of my roommates. We chatted about football for a while before he revealed that one of the couples in our apartment seems to enjoy early morning intimacy, given the thinness of the walls. This made me chuckle as Alexis and I typically engaged in similar activities on weekend mornings when we had the place to ourselves. Brooke and Derek usually visit her parents' home, which is roughly an hour and a half away. However, upon further reflection, I realized that Alexis and I hadn't indulged in morning intimacy for about a month, shifting more towards evening encounters or none at all. Could he have been referring to weekday mornings? This thought sent a chill down my spine. I considered seeking clarity from him, but felt it was too awkward and perhaps I was just overthinking. Am I reading too much into this, or is there something fishy going on? If so, how should I handle it? I'm hesitant to confront Alexis just yet because 1. I don't want to appear overly suspicious and jealous if there's nothing amiss. 2. If there is indeed something happening, I don't want them to become more discreet about it. I've contemplated making a surprise visit on one of those mornings when they're alone, but timing it perfectly is tricky. If I arrive too early or late, they might become more guarded. Update 1. Many of you advised that I should confront Brooke or try to catch her in the act. I decided to do both. On Sunday night, everyone was back in the apartment. My initial plan was to privately discuss the neighbor's comment with Brooke, but before I could, she made a surprising statement. She told Derek to go to bed early so he wouldn't be tired for his morning shift at work. This was unexpected. I knew Derek had an on-campus job, but he had always worked night shifts. Trying to appear nonchalant, I asked him when he started working morning shifts and how long he had been doing so. He revealed that he started picking up extra morning shifts a month ago, starting at 9. Since I leave at 7:45, it's plausible that I hadn't noticed this change. The rest of the night, I was consumed with doubts, questioning if Derek was lying about his work schedule, pondering if Alexis could be seeing someone else during the mornings, as some of you suggested, or wondering if I was simply being overly suspicious. I went to bed that night feeling emotionally exhausted and bewildered. The next morning, I left for classes as usual, functioning on autopilot. My thoughts alternated between rushing home to check on Alexis and convincing myself that I had too much work to neglect based on an uncertain theory. Ultimately, I left my first class and headed straight home. In hindsight, part of me wishes I hadn't. When I arrived at the apartment, only Alexis' car was there. Derek's was missing. As I approached the apartment, my heart pounded with anticipation. I wasn't sure what to expect. As soon as I reached the apartment door, I could hear a man's voice inside, along with laughter and a soft feminine giggle in response. Having frequented this subreddit, I've seen various reactions to such situations, but never once considered how I would react. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to discern their conversation, but I could only catch a word or two amidst the laughter. The shrill sound of Alexis's laughter echoed in my ears, a clear indication of the tickling game she was involved in. I should have been more patient in hindsight, but my patience had already worn thin. The moment I started toying with my keys, an eerie silence enveloped the apartment. She was in there with Mark. I hadn't mentioned Mark before. He lived in the apartment next to ours, not the guy who tipped me off. He was the one person I couldn't stand. His smug, know-it-all demeanor and inappropriate comments towards both girls had always irked me, but I never thought much of it. The moment I swung the door open, their faces mirrored the look of a deer caught in headlights, erasing any lingering hope I had that the situation was innocent. I had planned to confront them, demand answers, but to my embarrassment, tears welled up in my eyes. I didn't want them to witness my vulnerability. So, I muttered, "Nice. Real classy," and made a beeline for my car. Alexis's voice echoed in the hallway as she called my name, which only quickened my pace. I half expected her to chase after me, but when I reached my car, there was no one in sight. I drove to a nearby park and sat there in disbelief. The first thought that crossed my mind was how my family would react to this news and what I was going to tell them. My family adored Alexis. They often joked about our wedding and considered her a part of our family. Then, the practicalities of living arrangements crept into my mind. With finals just 2 weeks away, moving wasn't an option. I was vying for a spot in a highly competitive graduate program and couldn't afford any distractions, especially not a cheating girlfriend. Currently, I am residing at a friend's place. After explaining my predicament to him, he relayed the information to his parents, who kindly offered their home as a refuge. I will need to return to my own house at some point to collect some clothing. My plan is to do so during a lab session that Alexis, my girlfriend, cannot miss tomorrow. It took her roughly an hour to start inundating my phone with messages, but once she began, they came in nonstop. Initially, she asked me to return home so she could clarify the situation. Before I even had an opportunity to reply, another message arrived with her pleading for me to come back due to her suffering an anxiety attack, a situation I usually assist her with. Perhaps it's cold-hearted of me, but my immediate thought was that she deserved it. After a brief pause, she sent another text stating, "I don't know why you get so jealous. We were just hanging out." I decided to wait. Her next message read, "Look, I know it looks super sketchy. Believe me, if I were you, I'd think the same thing. But we didn't do anything." He needed advice on his girl problems. "You have to believe me." But the truth is, I don't have to believe her. Normally, witnessing a cheater attempt to justify their actions would provide me with a perverse sense of satisfaction. However, my mind kept replaying all the wonderful moments we shared together and questioning if she was unfaithful during those times as well. I am curious about when this betrayal began, but I am also afraid that it might have been happening for longer than the month I've been suspecting. Later that night, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. It was from the kind gentleman who lives next door. He mentioned, I am paraphrasing as it was quite a lengthy text, that he got my number from Derek. He expressed his sincere apologies for my current ordeal and mentioned that he would have informed me earlier had he been certain. He admitted to knowing that his friend was seeing a girl who had a boyfriend, but he didn't connect the dots until he learned the girl's name. As many of you guessed, his comment was an attempt to give me a heads up. So, he has certainly earned the title of Bro of the Year. I don't believe Derek and Brooke are aware of the situation yet. I haven't contacted them as I'm struggling to find the right words. I'm aware that revealing this will disrupt our living situation and friendships. I suppose I should reach out to them before Alexis spins her own version of the story. I'm curious about what the considerate neighbor said when he asked for my number. I don't think he disclosed anything to them, as they would have mentioned it. Right? Unless they sided with her. If that's the case, then I've lost my girlfriend and my friends. If anyone has any advice on how to handle such a situation, particularly those who have experienced something similar, I would appreciate your input. Apart from the friend I am currently staying with, I don't have many others to turn to. Alexis, Brooke, and Derek were essentially my family. Alexis and I had even discussed spending our lives together. She was the first girl I have ever been truly serious about. Update 2. As the semester draws to a close, I've been swamped with work. Most of you suggested that I immerse myself in my studies, and that's exactly what I've been doing. I've been spending most of my time at the library, a place Alexis rarely frequents. While writing the last update, it dawned on me how foolish I had been not to share my side of the story with Derek and Brooke. I took a screenshot of the text message from our friendly neighbor. Will note, I've changed all the names except for Mark's, because, well, screw you, Mark. Almost immediately after sending it, Derek began bombarding my phone with calls and texts, clearly indicating that he was oblivious to the situation. Meanwhile, Alexis was also sending me messages, pleading for a chance to meet up. Overwhelmed and feeling down, I sent a brief message to Derek, explaining that I was not in the mood to talk, and then switched off my phone for the night. The next morning, I received a text from Derek inviting me to dinner and drinks at my favorite restaurant. He assured me that it would just be the two of us, even Brooke wouldn't be there. Despite having lost my appetite since everything unfolded, I appreciated his gesture and decided to meet him after my classes. As I arrived at the restaurant, my heart was pounding with the fear that Alexis might somehow show up, but she didn't. Derek greeted me with a warm hug and broke the ice with, "Dude, what the fuck?" This is where things take an unexpected turn. Some of you speculated that Brooke might take Alexis' side or had been helping her hide the truth all along. I wasn't convinced because even though Brooke is closer to Alexis, she and I have known each other longer. According to Derek, Brooke was livid when she found out about Alexis' betrayal. In his words, "I sort of wanted to give Alexis a piece of my mind, but Brooke beat me to it, and then some." Alexis hails from a small, traditional town where her parents held conservative views. They were oblivious to the fact that Alexis and I were sharing a living space, and she was insistent on keeping it that way for fear of losing their financial support. While they were cordial to me, they were wary of their daughter being in a relationship, believing it would detract from her studies and potentially lead to an unwanted pregnancy. Derek informed me that Brooke had given Alexis an ultimatum: pack up and find a new place or risk having her secret revealed to her parents. According to Derek, Alexis had spent that night in the living room, clutching one of my forgotten sweaters and wailing about her ruined life. Brooke, not one to mince words, had retorted from her room, "Well, maybe you shouldn't have slept with Mark then." The mental image of this scene brought a hint of amusement. Brooke's fiery temperament and straightforward approach were traits I was familiar with, but her reaction to Alexis' infidelity was unexpected and touching. During our dinner, my fears of losing my friends dissipated, and I managed to eat a bit of sushi. As we parted ways, Derek assured me that he'd inform me once Alexis had moved out so I could return. However, I declined his offer for 3 reasons. 1. The apartment, including Derek and Brooke, was a constant reminder of Alexis. 2. The thought of Alexis and Mark possibly having been intimate in my room was repulsive. 3. Given my emotional state, I preferred not to feel like a third wheel around a happy couple, despite their consideration. Derek understood my stance but left the offer open should I change my mind. He mentioned that the friendship between Brooke and Alexis seemed to be irreparable. The week passed without much happening, save for my continuous efforts to avoid Alexis. As we were part of a small undergraduate program with only 60 students, we shared many classes. I enlisted the help of 2 friends, briefing them on the situation and asking them to watch out for Alexis. I started arriving for classes at the last minute. On one occasion, I received a text warning me of Alexis' presence outside my classroom, complete with her tearful display. Opting for caution, I decided to skip class. Later that night, I received a lengthy Facebook message from Alexis. She detailed everything from the start, explaining how Mark had been flirtatious with her in the halls, as he was known to do with other girls, and she had tried to respond amicably. However, her friendly response was misconstrued as flirtation, leading Mark to kiss her abruptly one day. Reading her message made my stomach churn, but once I started, I felt compelled to finish it. Alexis confessed that she felt remorseful for encouraging Mark and that this guilt had stopped her from rejecting his subsequent advances. She believed she was to blame for the situation and struggled with saying no. She admitted they had slept together 3 times, which she despised, and claimed he had coerced her into it. She clarified it wasn't rape, but she hadn't explicitly consented either. Alexis intended to end things during the conversation I had accidentally walked in on. She expressed understanding if I needed time and space, but vowed to do everything possible to make amends. Her proposed ways of making up to me included treating me like royalty, giving me full access to her phone and passwords, cutting off all contact with Mark and her male friends, and offering me-up sex whenever I desired. I didn't respond to her message. The idea of keeping her on Facebook was tempting, just to witness the drama unfold through her melodramatic statuses and song lyrics about mistakes and forgiveness. However, I knew myself too well and decided against obsessively checking her page or reminiscing over old photos. I blocked her instead. Derek later informed me that Alexis was in hysterics over my actions. On a brighter note, the family I was staying with were wonderful hosts. Although I felt guilty occupying their space and using their utilities, they declined my offer to contribute towards rent and bills. They even humorously suggested that the first month was free of charge and any extension could be discussed later. They were accustomed to hosting troubled friends of their children, which made me feel less intrusive. I was incredibly grateful for their kindness. As for Will, the helpful neighbor, I called him to express my gratitude. We didn't arrange a dinner yet, but it's in the plans. He apologized profusely for the situation and expressed his disdain for Mark due to various reasons. Mark had been unusually quiet lately and mentioned to another friend that he had been dumped. I didn't want to dwell on it. As for my future plans, I intend to maintain my friendship with Derek and Brooke, albeit with limited contact due to the painful reminders of Alexis. I thanked Brooke for her decision to evict Alexis, and she assured me that she would alert me when Alexis had left so I could retrieve my belongings. In the meantime, I've been focusing on studying, applying for graduate schools, and spending time with the family I'm living with. I've also posted an advertisement on my university's Facebook group seeking roommates for the next semester and received a few responses. I plan to inform my parents about the situation after finals, as my mother tends to be inquisitive and I'm currently not in the mood to answer numerous questions. Update 3. Once finals ended, I did well given the circumstances. Everything hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, almost worse than the initial insult. I removed all my social media pictures with her, threw out stuff that reminded me of her, took our songs off my playlists, yada yada. We've been inseparable since we met, so this was over 2 years of accumulated memories. Long story short, it was very hard, but I had an urge to get it all done before the new year. That whole cliche new year, new me thing. I guess. I don't know. Anyways, one particular Redditor sent me a message about how Alexis might be driven to suicide now that she's lost everything, her closest friends, her boyfriend, and her apartment. I know that seems like an overdramatic prediction, but I couldn't get it out of my mind after reading it. What Alexis did was absolutely freaking terrible, but I felt like a final conversation might give me better closure and maybe help her understand that it's completely over and get her to move on. So I planned to meet with her before everyone went home for break. A lot of you were big on the icing her out, so I'm genuinely sorry to disappoint, but I had to do this for me. I sent Alexis, if you want to talk, we can meet up somewhere. But there's no way we can be together after what happened, so please don't ask, okay? She responded almost immediately asking when and where. We arranged and met at an off-campus coffee place. When I got there, she was already at a table and got up to hug me. I waved her away, and she jerked back like a puppy that had been kicked. I felt shitty immediately, but I wanted to get it over with. Our conversation began with meaningless chit-chat, with Alexis inquiring about my well-being and academic performance. However, I quickly cut through the small talk and asked her a question that had been plaguing my mind. Was she unhappy in our relationship? Her eyes widened in surprise, and she rapidly denied any dissatisfaction. She reiterated her previous explanation, saying that she had difficulty rejecting advances and that the other guy had been particularly persistent. I wasn't having it. I interrupted her and demanded that she take responsibility for her actions. I could maybe understand her yielding to a surprise kiss, but going as far as having sex with him 3 times? That was inexcusable. She lowered her gaze, shrugged, and mumbled a reluctant agreement. Her eyes welled up with tears as she apologized profusely, insisting that I could never comprehend the depth of her remorse. Predictably, she asked if there was any possibility of us getting back together, despite my prior warning not to raise the subject. I simply shook my head. I offered her the option to continue living with Derek and Brooke, but she declined, revealing that she had already made arrangements to move in with another female friend. The conversation then spiraled into a repetitive cycle of her trying to justify her actions by citing her fear of appearing prudish and me attempting to make her acknowledge that such an excuse was flimsy at best. For some reason, it was crucial for me that she admit to single-handedly sabotaging our promising relationship. However, her stubbornness prevailed, and she refused to do so. Eventually, I let it go, and we ended our meeting on relatively friendly terms. As I was leaving, she reached out and held my hand, parting her lips as if to say something else, but ultimately shook her head and released her grip. Initially, our conversation left me feeling worse than before, but it eventually led me to a significant realization. Alexis was never the kind of person I wanted to be with, even without her infidelity. She consistently evaded responsibility, blaming failed classes on incompetent professors and unemployment on bad luck rather than her own lack of effort. I guess I had been too infatuated to notice this before. After leaving the coffee shop, I decided to hang out with Derek. We spent the evening at our apartment, drinking beer and playing video games, which lifted my spirits significantly. Brooke was also present but mostly kept to herself. We briefly discussed the recent events, which provided some much-needed closure. He confessed that they had been unsuccessful in their search for a third roommate, excluding complete strangers who they were not comfortable living with. He asked me once again to consider staying with them. I could sense his earnest desire and felt guilty about leaving them with the burden of the lease, so I agreed. However, I made it clear that I would move and only after Alexis had removed all her belongings. The furniture belonged to her, having been there even before I moved in, and the thought of sleeping on that bed was still unbearable. Brooke also apologized for her excessive involvement and heated argument with Alexis. Apparently, her stepfather's infidelity towards her mother had made this a sensitive issue for her. I reassured her that I didn't mind her intervention and even welcomed it if she felt the need to do so again in the future. I also treated Will to a meal and drinks at a popular spot near our campus. Many of you were curious about the other problematic behaviors Mark had exhibited that had infuriated Will. It turns out, Mark was consistently negligent about paying rent, claimed he was unable to contribute to shared household expenses like dish soap, light bulbs, and cleaning supplies, and frequently created disturbances by yelling and laughing at inappropriate hours. Essentially, he was the epitome of an inconsiderate roommate. Will is a genuinely cool guy, and we had an extensive conversation about the Alexis situation as well as other topics like school and sports. It was surprisingly enjoyable. Eventually, I disclosed the entire situation to my parents. As anticipated, my mother inundated me with countless questions and shed many tears. That was an interesting experience. Going home did provide some solace, but my older brother's engagement on Christmas Eve, coupled with my recent circumstances, prevented me from being as thrilled for him as I should have been. This made me feel like a lousy sibling. Moreover, his engagement is all my family talks about now, and I'm just not in the mood to partake in those discussions. Life isn't perfect at the moment, but I'm managing. Alexis has removed her belongings, and I've purchased a second-hand bed and dresser from another student. My first week of classes was last week, and despite sounding like a complete nerd, I must admit that the courses are fascinating, hands-on, and the professors are incredibly engaging. Derek and Brooke have been extremely supportive and have made sure that I don't feel like an outsider. I ran into Mark in the hallway once. We both ignored each other, but the urge to punch him was overwhelming. I suppose that's a feeling that will fade with time. I was tempted to confront him about the whole situation, but considering the type of person Will described him to be, such a conversation would have led nowhere and probably only aggravated me further. Who do you think is right in this situation? Write about it in the comments. Let's get 1,000 subscribers together. Love you.